I remember playing at like clubs, and because I was playing some of the hot spots, you know, the promotion guys from Bad Boy would come and bring me acetates. And I remember really well, like the guy bringing me the acetate of Hypnotized by Biggie. No one had heard it, you know, just throwing it on for the first time, and just this like collective rush in the room, and just like you and the crowd at the same time feeling this immense like privilege to like be experiencing this song for the first time, you know. It made things a little more sacred. Hi, this is Mark Ronson, and you're checking out Crate Diggers. This is a Latin record on Fania that has an incredible drum break in the middle, where it kind of goes from being like a Afro-Cuban rhythm to just being a straight break beat. So I would play this because it was a pretty rare record if I had like a really in-the-know crowd or people that wanted to be like, oh shit, what was that? So one time I was DJing a club in New York, and Prince was in the club. And it was this big 2-level club on Sunday night hip-hop party. And I think to myself, what can I do to get Prince to come into the booth? Like, I have to play a record so amazing it's going to blow his mind, you know? So I played this record, and it hits the break, and surely enough, I see the heads of these 2 big bouncers that are over the whole rest of the crowd, kind of moving through the crowd, right? Come to the booth, and Prince is, you know, I'm in the booth, there's like a little rope there, and Prince is kind of standing like observing, thinking like, you know, it's incredible, but trying to keep my cool. So he comes over and he's like, what is that record? It's like kind of showing the thing. And then I threw on Stevie Wonder, All I Do. Now, you know, DJs back then had these bootleg 12 inches of stuff, because there was a song like Stevie Wonder, All I Do, there was no official 12 inch. You couldn't play it off the long playing album because the quality wasn't good enough for the club. So Prince is in the middle of his giant like anti-bootlegging campaign that's very public, and here I am throwing on a bootleg. He's like, what's that? And I was like, it's a bootleg. But let me explain. I own the original album. We play this as DJs because it's a better pressing for the club. He's like, damn. He's like, I'm gonna call Stevie Wonder right now and tell him there's some DJ in New York playing a bootleg of one of his records. No. He's like, I mean, let me find out. Wake up Stevie Wonder in the middle of the night, like just f***ing with me. But it was kind of an amazing story. My parents used to have these pretty wild, like, after-hours things back at their house. It's like the late 70s. And I would always wake up in the middle of the night, and there would be loud music playing, and I would sit in front of the speakers and play air drums. Like, I didn't care. It was in my own little world. I wasn't trying to show off to anyone. If there was music, I would just perch down in front of the speaker. My stepdad was a musician in this band called Foreigner, and they were playing pretty big shows when he hooked up with my mother when I was like 5 or 6, and I would go to their shows, and I would sneak back along the backstage and just perch behind the drum riser. They'd be playing to like, you know, 20,000 people like out in front, and I'd just be mimicking the drummer, like playing air drums the whole way through. I was always drawn to like rhythmic music, you know. I also had, you know, a definite transfixion and a love for something about the way that a record spun on the turntable and the act of putting the needle on it. And I remember going to the store to buy 45s, like how kids would go buy comic books. I do remember going to Tower Records and buying my first 12 inches, like as a 9-year-old once I moved to New York. And that was Whistle, Just Bugging. They were kind of like a Fat Boys knockoff group. And a song called Let's Go All the Way by Sly Fox. And those were the first 2 12 inches that I bought. This is a record that I really fell in love with. Like a lot of the soul music I listened to, I discovered because it had been sampled to a song that I love. So this, Baby This Love I Have, by the wonderful Minnie Riperton, is the sample of the bass line from Check the Rhyme. Do-do-do, do-do-do-do. And Inside My Love is the piano line from one of those amazing songs at the end of Midnight Marauders. This is an incredible record. All the Minnie Riperton solo records are incredible. There were 3 kids in my high school that rapped. And they were in this talent show they enrolled themselves in. It was the Reverend Al Sharpton endorsed talent show in Stuyvesant School. And they asked me, they knew that my stepdad had some equipment, and they asked if I'd make the beat. And that was the first time that I started experimenting around with these samplers, and I looped up like a Beatles loop and slowed it down and had my friend play drums on it. And I just remember loving the process of it, of making beats, taking samples, adding drum loops, just taking things that you love and sort of making them your own, you know. This is the first record I ever sampled. I sampled a song. Paul McCartney's going to see this and sue me. I sampled a song called The Word on here, which was quite like a funky song, especially for the Beatles. No, the Beatles had amazing rhythm sections, don't get me wrong, but and I slowed it down in the way that Muggs would kind of slow a lot of samples, like really, really low down on those early Cypress Hill recordings to give it that kind of woozy, dusted feeling. This is brand new Heavies. So I was basically listening to a lot of loud white rock and roll music until this band sort of came out, and this and Jamiroquai came, and obviously I'd heard of James Brown and Stevie Wonder, but I didn't have any real knowledge of the deep stuff of funk music. And I was 14 when this band came out, the brand new Heavies, and it really turned my world upside down. I fell in love with the sound of it. I started getting obsessively into rare groove, and coming back to London to visit my dad, I would go to Soho to those record shops and buy these mixtapes. So brand new Heavies was really, really massively influential thing on me as a kid. And I would actually come to England and I would call this label Acid Jazz and completely bullshit. Like, yeah, I'm DJ all these big clubs like in New York, like, can I come by and get some promos? They're like, what's your name again? And I would kind of like name drop and maybe list a few clubs that maybe my friend Jules used to DJ at. I started DJing at any place that would have me, like you do in the beginning. You just want the experience, you just want to play out, you know, you're lugging your turntables and you're thinking you might lose money by the time you pay for cabs, you know, the early gigs. I think because I had so much love for all this funk and a rare groove, and I understood that stuff, even though I wasn't probably an amazing DJ technically at that time. I understood soul music and what made people move. So I got slots, and then, you know, you make a little name for yourself because you're the new guy on the scene and people like you. So then I got in kind of opening for Funk Flex and Big Cap on the more sort of like big club side of things. It's funny because I can still tell, even though these records have been moved across the Atlantic Ocean and into different things, I can still tell little blocks are still together because they used to be in my crates together. So this was sort of like the funk break. So this is Neville Brothers, which has Hercules, which is a, you know, kind of classic break, the bass line, the doo 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 doo. You probably heard it. So that's in here, and that's obviously next to this Barry White because it's got Playing Your Game Baby on it, which is the that horns, fatback band I found loving. This is really the sort of like New York disco, late 70s, early 80s disco set that I would be playing in those clubs. I think the DJing, the production is really inseparable in a way because the DJing informed so much of my production. At the time, it was like me and Stretch and maybe AM in LA was starting to mix, you know, the odd rock record in here and there. It was like to play AC/DC Back in Black into Joan Jett, I Love Rock and Roll, when you had Method Man and Little Kim dancing on banquettes, was kind of like, it was fun, it was refreshing, and it was kind of like a novelty, you know. So from mixing those kind of records together and playing hip-hop and playing things like Rufus and Shaka Khan in the middle of my sets, Dominic Chenier, who had the label with Nika Costa and D'Angelo and some other people, who came up to me and said, oh, I got this girl I signed. I don't know what she should sound like. I just know it should sound like one of your DJ sets, you know. That was the first record I did, and that came out well. And I remember, like, DJing in a club. It was D'Angelo's album release party and playing the acetate of Like a Feather, which to me was completely inspired by DJ Premier. It had this kind of chopped samples on it and the heavily swung drums, and, you know, we had added our own bit, the little Beatles style guitar and all these things. But to me, when I made it, I was just thinking like, okay, Premier. So Premier comes in the booth while I'm playing the song, and I've never met him before, and he's a pretty big, imposing character. And his kind of, if you don't know him, his default look can look quite angry. So I'm like, oh shit. So he comes in the booth, he's like, what's this record? And I was like, I'm struggling with this moment because this is my hero, and I don't know if he's gonna, if I tell him it's me or something like that, he's gonna be like, who the fuck is ripping off my whole shit? So I was like, I made it, sir. He goes, it's Nika Costin. He's like, you did the beat? And I was like, yeah, it's just the moment where my hero like slams a fire extinguisher over my head, and he's like, it's tough, and just stood there for 3 minutes like nodding his head in the booth, and I swear it was definitely the highlight of my musical life to that point. This was a record, a great record that QTip looped up for his song Get Involved, and I remember I used to DJ a lot with QTip in New York, and I still do when I'm around, but he would play this, the original, and I remember one time Puffy sent like one of his like minions up to the booth to like find out what this song was, because obviously Puffy heard it and was like wanted to loop it, and I think Q-Tip was still sitting on that Get Involved beat, and he was just like, he just gave him like some kind of like, just told him the name of a totally different song. I've never had to wear a hazmat suit in Brazil, but it definitely takes you into some amazing people's lives and houses and apartments. There was a really well-respected record dealer named San, this Japanese guy who lived in Fort Greene in Brooklyn. I was 19, going to his house, and like I had never been to Japan yet at that point. You're sort of like taking off the shoes and sitting cross-legged and looking through like 70s blaxploitation soundtracks. To be invited into people's house, going to Tokyo and meeting Muro for the first time and going into his house. It's like, I think my love of records has probably brought me into contact with more people in my life than probably anything else, somehow indirectly. This is interesting because I lost my virginity after a Nine Inch Nails concert, so it was on this album. I really loved Nine Inch Nails because I felt like there were a lot of obnoxious, embarrassing, like white rock people rapping during this era of the sort of mid-90s. And Trent Reznor, I don't know if it was that Detroit thing, like he understood the sounds of 808s and 909s, but whenever he did it, it's like the only one to me that ages well. Like I can hear this album and it sounds pretty amazing to this day. I think that it was pretty much just weekends were just for digging, like whatever it was. There were little record stores in New York, like Gimme Gimme and stuff, that were only open on weekends. There were flea markets. There were the record conventions. There were the shows. I remember as like 18 years old going to like the Roosevelt Hotel for the record convention there and like seeing like Diamond D and Q-Tip and Large Professor walk around, just being like, holy shit. And like walking around like looking at a record like Ramp, the Vinnie Applebaum sample that was like $100. There were two things. I loved having the original that the samples were from, because I loved enjoying those records and just knowing the history of these hip-hop records I loved. And also you were looking for beats and stuff that nobody used. That was part of the thing that really helped my sets in New York at that time. If there was a big record, like say Busta Rhymes, Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Could See came out, I would make sure by my next club gig I had scoured every place to find the Seals and Crofts song that was the sample from it, because the crowd would like get a real rush and kick out of hearing it. And some of the ones that were more obvious, like Biggie Hypnotize and Herb Alpert Rise, but the way you put them together, because I feel like as long as you're keeping the dance floor going, you're not really killing it. I think the best kind of set you can put together is like an incredible party set that also works as a 20% lesson, like you're educating the crowd. AM and I would drive around in his car, DJ AM, and he turned me on to Z-Trip, to that first CD that he had where he had Girl from Ipanema with Planet Rock under it. This was before the mashup era. And to be honest, anytime I hear mashup, it slightly makes me cringe anyway, because it's just blends. It's like what we've been doing as DJs for 20 years, But Z-Trip had such a good ear for the right records to put together, and it was very inventive and sounded great. So, so that was Planet Rock with the Girl from Ipanema, and then obviously AM was quite influenced by that and had a lot of very inventive, awesome kind of mashup blend things of his own, and myself as well. This is a great record as well, Glenn McRae Rocking Chair. There was a classic underground 90s hip-hop record called Danger by Blase Blase that was a big indie club record. They sampled from this, and it's just all around it's a great record. 90% of Me Is You is on that record too, which is another kind of classic break of that era. 80, 100. I've never spent like anything more than that on the record. Monty Alexander. I was such a massive fan of the Beatnuts in their first few records, and there was a song on there called Let Off a Couple. And I remember going to buy that record because I was so obsessed with that piece of music. It was a cover of Love and Happiness. And then being in a club that night, and I think seeing Juju from the Beatnuts, who I didn't really know, and kind of like trying to carry it so like the thing was like sticking out so he might like be like, oh, what's this kid doing? Hey kid, come over here, or whatever. Back to Black. I don't really have a lot of my own records or things that I produced in my collection because mainly I don't listen to them. You don't want to look like some douchebag when people are looking through your records. But when I see anything from that record, I usually pick it up. Amy came to my studio on Mercer Street. She was in New York and she was leaving the next day. And this guy called me. I was like, "Do you want to meet Amy Winehouse?" And I remember the song "In My Bed," produced by Salam on her first album, where he had taken the Made You Look beat that he had made and flipped it. And Made You Look is one of my favorite beats of all time, and I used to play that in my sets, and people would be like, "Oh, what's that record?" I'd say, "Oh, it's Amy Winehouse, In My Bed." But I didn't know much about her, so she came over to my studio, and she was outside. I remember walking down the street and seeing her, because she's pretty striking, memorable looking. And I said, "Oh, I'm Mark." She goes, "Oh, all right. I'm going up to see Mark Ronson." I was like, no, I'm Mark Ronson. And she thought I was the engineer. She's like, "Oh, I thought you were like gonna be an old Jewish guy with a beard or something." Like, I guess like she thought that I was older or more Ruben-esque. So we started talking about music, like just in the way that you start bullshitting. You meet a new singer, someone you might work with. You talk about the music you like, and you start like playing maybe some things like, "Oh, have you heard this?" And she said she was just obsessed with this 60s girl group music, like the Shangri-Las and all the music that they played down at her mixer, like the pub she goes to. This is a wonderful record by the Ronettes, so produced by Phil Spector, and has Be My Baby and Walking in the Rain. And this was a massive influence on me musically when we were making Back to Black with Amy. Amy kind of introduced me to this music. She introduced me to this and the Shangri-Las, and this album I remember picking up after we had made Back to Black because I saw it and it was quite expensive. I saw it in Bleecker Bob's or something, but I just kind of wanted it as a, oh yeah, I guess I lied when I said what's the most I've ever played for a record, but I wanted it as a kind of memory of and a token of working on that album with Amy. So I was really inspired, and I knew that I didn't have anything right to play her. I didn't want to start playing these beats I had lying around. Like, I wanted to, like, knock her off her feet, because I was, just really impressed, and I had a feeling like, I need to work with this girl. So she went home and back to the hotel, and then that night I came up with the piano stuff for Back to Black, and she came in the next day, and she was really into it. She kind of wrote the song in like an hour, and she was like, this is what I want my record to sound like. And she ended up staying in New York. And she had a lot of the songs written already, and we would just arrange them. So I was using like bullshit computer tricks to try and make things sound old. And I remembered the Dap Kings. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, I'd sampled something of theirs on my first album. And I was like, we should use these guys to play the record, because they're like the real deal shit. So I played her a Dap Kings thing, and she was like, oh, that's the nuts. Yeah, so she had to go back to England. I called Gabe from the Dap Kings, found out he had never been paid for like the sample on my first record, so I just smoothed that over. And then he came over and I played him the demos, and I was like, do you want to work on this girl? And like that's what's so amazing about the Dap Kings. Like, they just live so in their own world. They only care about their music and what they're doing. And he was kind of like, it seems like a lot of work, like, so I kind of pleaded with Gabe to record these things. I was like, it'll only take 3 or 4 days. And I remember like kind of like feeling embarrassed, but had gone so hard on the sell. I was like, come on, if we do this well, like, a year from now, like, we'll all be sitting at the Grammys. And I remember thinking like, what kind of bullshit am I talking? Like, I just sound like such an ass right now. And then, ironically enough, he did win a Grammy from it, which he cares so much about. He sent to his grandmother in Riverside. So we did the recordings. Amy had to go back to England. We went to the studio, and I remember the first day going in while they were getting drum sounds. It was the most incredible sound I'd ever heard. I could not believe, even though I'd heard Dat King's records, seeing it for myself, that they could get the sounds of all my favorite drum breaks, like records that I paid 30, 50, 70 bucks for, scouring bins all over the place, and they were getting it live right there today in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and could play any pattern that they wanted. I wasn't a slave to this one bar loop that I found on the record or chopping it to pieces. And it was one of the most, like, I almost felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. And then Amy came back to New York, and then we did all the vocals. And she was, luckily she was happy and over the moon with the way the Dat King's playing sounded. So it definitely is like mind-boggling to me, because it's just something that we made that just felt good, you know. You don't really have any control of it. I was just incredibly lucky to meet her and to get to make the music that we did, and it's amazing that the record would go on to mean so much to all these people. I think it's just because she had one of those like spirits like John Lennon or Kurt Cobain or Tupac, like when it's just like someone's just burned so fiery, like that the upside of it is that they speak to so many people, because there's just something so visceral and urgent about it, and at the same time they can burn too bright and not really get to just hang out and stay around like as much as the rest of us do. I think there's always going to be like a knee jerk to what everyone else is doing, and I think that people actually crave having a personal relationship with their music. There's something about when you put the record on and you go to the store, you've really gone out of your way to like put this piece of music in your possession, and you put it on the platter and you put the needle on it, and it's like the whole thing, it's like preparing a meal, you know. It's so visceral and it's so involving. It's so much. It's the difference between eating an amazing home-cooked meal at home and going to a restaurant, you know. You put all that care into the one at home, so of course it's going to taste better. And it probably just tastes better anyway. It's like, that's the thing with the record, like, you've gone through such a big ordeal to make sure that you could have that experience of listening to their music. You're going to be more grateful, and it just sounds 1,000 times better anyway. So I don't think we'll ever go fully out of vogue to hear music in the best possible way that you can. It's actually probably quicker to explain a record to a kid by saying, like, well, basically just think of it as an MP3 burned onto a brown piece of plastic.